Hello there. In this video I'm going to talk about how you can use the FluidDesigner for 3D printing assets with Blender 2.9 and the JewelCraft add-on, and we're going to look at the required add-ons that we recommend you use for 3D printing and how important it is to use the save startup file, which makes life easy every time you open a new document in Blender. Okay, so first thing is if you go to our website at fluiddesigner.co.uk and go to the download page, so /download, you can see there what some of the software is that you need to install. I mean, the first thing is to install Blender itself, which you can find at blender.org/download. You can install the Windows version or the Mac operating system or Linux, etc., whichever operating system that you're using. So that's the first thing to install. We then recommend that you install the JewelCraft add-on from GitHub. So here's the website, it's github.com mrachinsky at JewelCraft. So if you just Google GitHub JewelCraft, you should be able to find it, or you can click on the link from our page there. And something that's quite useful to identify on this page is that there are a range of videos here: prongs and cutters, widgets, asset manager. That one's really important to look at first of all. So there are a range of videos there which can help you out. Now, in terms of installing JewelCraft, when you go to Blender itself, so once you've installed Blender and you've downloaded the JewelCraft add-on, what you need to do is to go to Edit and Preferences and click on Add-ons and Install, and then you just browse to the folder where you've got the JewelCraft add-on, highlight the add-on, which is just a zip file, and click Install add-on. Now, I've already got it on my system, and once you've got it on your system, you should be able to scroll down, and I think it's somewhere near the bottom. We should be able to see, here it is, Object JewelCraft, that's where it's listed. And if you click on the left there, there are a range of facilities in here. Update, you can check for any updates. It does do it automatically as well. And there is the Asset Manager, which I'll come back to in a few minutes. And reporting a bug and documentation, etc. Important is that this needs to be ticked and you need Object JewelCraft on your system. If we go back to our website at fluiddesigner.co.uk, after you've installed the JewelCraft add-on, we recommend that you download and install the FluidDesigner assets, and they're basically on GitHub. Not on GitHub, they're on Dropbox. Now, if you haven't got a Dropbox account, it doesn't matter. All you need to do is to click over here to download and do a direct download. And all that does is download a zip file, and you can then just double click on it and unzip it. And in my case, I've unzipped it in my Documents folder as FluidDesigner for 3D printing. So if I select that folder, what you'll see is that there are a lot of subfolders, some jewelry, there's just one mesh one, and loads of patterns. And these are all folders that will appear in Blender once we actually link it from the JewelCraft add-on. So if we go back to Blender, so we've installed JewelCraft. I didn't show you where it was, but it's actually over here on the right hand side. So if we click on JewelCraft there, and what we want to do now is to link it to the FluidDesigner assets. Well, I've actually already linked it, and essentially if I click on assets there, these are all the folders that you will unzip when you unzip the FluidDesigner patterns and objects. So these are all the folders that I just showed you there, and we need to link to this, and we can do that by going to Edit and Preferences and go to Add-ons, scroll down to where it says JewelCraft, because we're going to use JewelCraft essentially as the asset manager. So we select JewelCraft, click on Asset Manager. Now here's the link to that folder, but you won't have that on your system when you initially install it. So what you need to do is to double click on the folder here and scroll to the folder. So it's, in my case, it's in Documents and FluidDesigner for 3D printing. So it's the jewelry folders and all these pattern folders, and then you just need to accept that. And so you'll have this link here to the FluidDesigner asset library from JewelCraft. So if we just close that down, and that's where you get all of these items, all these folders here. So when you open any of these folders, so if we open Harrington Font, for example, you get a list of all the assets that are in that particular folder, and these are all objects that can be imported into Blender and used for 3D printing. Alright, so if we go back to the FluidDesigner.co.uk download page, the other thing we would recommend that you need to download and install is Netfabb Basic. Now that doesn't install within Blender itself, it's a separate application, and it's just something that we use to repair meshes before we 3D print them. We also recommend that you download and install the curve add-on FD parametric curves. FD is FluidDesigner parametric curves, and again, once you've downloaded that, it's just a zip file, and you just go to Blender and Edit and Preferences again, and go to Add-ons and Install, and then you look for where the add-on is that you've downloaded. Now it's already on my system, and it's this one here, FD Parametric Curves, and that just needs to be ticked. And what that does is when you go to Add and Curve, you should get FluidDesigner Parametric Curves, and there's a range of curves here which you can use to design jewelry and other objects. So if I select that one there, that's the N upper curve. Now whenever you place a new object, it doesn't matter whether it's a mesh or a curve in Blender, it's always a good idea to open up the panel that appears in the left here, because there are various parameters that you can change here which will change the actual object itself. That one's going a little bit mad. Let me just set it back down to a smaller number. Let me change the scale to say 3. So as you can see, you can change these values over here, and that will change the object on the screen. Okay, so let me just delete that one. Oops, I haven't got it selected. Alright, and I'll just go back to View and Viewpoint and Top View again. Okay, so that's the Add FluidDesigner Parametric Curves. Again, if we go back to the download page, the other thing that we recommend is you download and install the FluidDesigner Parametric Meshes. So again, that's just a zip file, and again, from within Blender, you go to Edit and Preferences, and go to Install, and go to the folder where you've got the zip file that you've downloaded and install it. And as I say, it's already on my system here, and you'll find it under Add Mesh FluidDesigner FD Parametric Meshes. And so what should appear on your menu system is Add Mesh FluidDesigner Parametric Meshes. So there's a range of objects that you can import there. And notice that this panel opened up this time. Usually that panel there is hidden away when you click Add, whether it's a mesh or a curve, but it's always a good idea to open it up and change some of the parameters in there. So I'm going to just delete that, so X on the keyboard to delete, and I need to just go View. I like to work in Top View all the time, so Viewpoint and Top View. One other feature that you could also add, another add-on, it's linked to JewelCraft, and that's something called the Bulltron add-on. It's not actually listed on our website there, but it's created essentially by the same gentleman, a Russian gentleman, Marachinsky, who creates JewelCraft. So if you just Google GitHub and Bulltron, and you'll see Mr. Rachinsky's name again, and it's the Bulltron add-on. So if you just download that zip file, so go to code and download the zip file, and again if you go to Blender and go to edit, preferences, add-ons and install, and then just install the add-on Bulltron, that will give you this one option over here. So we've got JewelCraft and we've got Bulltron. Now Bulltron is just for joining objects together. So if I, for example, if I add a cube, and if I just move it a little bit away from the center, I'm just offsetting it slightly, and then if I add a second cube, and I'll just move it up, so I've got two cubes there. Now very often when working with FluidDesigner for 3D printing assets, what you'll see is that we just join objects together very simply. We don't do anything other than join them together, because when we're working with curves, all those objects are curves. When we're working with curves, as long as we actually run them through Netfabb Basic at the end, that'll fix everything for us. If you're working with meshes, and these two cubes are meshes, it's not a good idea to just join objects, because if I hold down, I'm just going to switch on the screencast keys, I hadn't got that on before. If I hold down the shift key, as you can see here, down here in the left hand corner, and select those two objects, if I go to object and join them together, now that looks as though it's one object, and it, you know, to all intents and purposes it looks okay, but it isn't in fact okay, because if I just go to the panel up here and select a different mode here, if you look inside there, what you should see is that there are some lines inside. So there are faces essentially inside the cube on the left. So the object on the right, there are faces from it inside the cube on the left. Now, from a 3D printing point of view, that's not really a good system. When you join two objects together like that, there shouldn't be internal faces. Alright, so how do we get rid of that? Well, if I just do Ctrl-Z on the keyboard, just to undo the join, so those two objects are not joined together now, they are in fact two separate objects. But if I highlight one of the cubes and hold down the shift key and highlight the other, if I now go to Bulltron and create a union, in other words join the two objects together, what you should see is those internal lines, those internal faces have now disappeared. So you should be able to see that there is no line going down here, no internal faces. So that's the way to properly join meshes together. So Bulltron is an add-on for doing that. There are other ways of doing it in Blender, but that's one of them. So if I just go to New and General and don't save that one, I'll just return to my startup screen. So we recommend that you install all those various add-ons as well as the FluidDesigner assets. Now the other thing that we recommend that you do is to create a basic startup screen. And if we go to File and Default, you can save the startup file. And what that means is every time you open a new file, it will default to that startup file. So one of the things that you need to do is over in the panel over here on the right hand side, you need to go to Scene Properties, and you need to set the unit system to metric and millimeters. Now as you can see, mine is already set to metric and millimeters. Well, if I change it to metric and meters and change the unit scale back to 1, which is more or less the kind of default setting. Okay, that's okay. Let me just do that again. So if I set it to meters and the unit scale as 1, right? If I use my asset manager and if I go, let me see, let me go to the Yahoo Animals, And if I import a bulldog, and I'm just zooming out here by scrolling the center mouse button. Now that looks like a bulldog, and it is a bulldog, but if you wanted to try and 3D print that, you'd have real problems if the units are metric and meters. Because if we go to item over here, what we can see is that the dimensions of this bulldog are 69.5 meters. That's from nose to tail. And 44.6 meters from the bottom of its feet to the top of its head. Now that's clearly a completely ridiculous size to be trying to 3D print. Okay, so what you need to do to change that is we need to change the length. Well, we need to have metric unit system, and we need to change meters to millimeters, and we need to change the unit scale to 0.001. And that's the default setting that I use. And once you've done that, if you import the asset, you can see that the bulldog now is 69.5 millimeters from nose to tail and 44.6 millimeters from the bottom of its feet to the top of its head. Now that's the unit system that you need to be using if you're 3D printing. Okay, so if I just delete that bulldog, it's X on the keyboard and delete, and if I just go to File and New and don't save it. Alright, so very important is in the scene properties, select millimeters and the unit scale is 0.001. Now, once you've done that, if you go to File and Default and save the startup file, every time you open a new document in Blender, it will default to millimeters and 0.001. That's really important to actually set up in the first place. I personally also like having this move icon over here on the left selected. So in other words, when I use my asset add-on manager, so if I add, let's say, an animal 2D, I'll import a rabbit this time, right? It will import it and I will get the red arrow and the green arrow. If this isn't selected, the move icon over here, if you use the select box and do File and Default and save startup file, you won't have any move icons on the screen. So I have that selected before I go to File, Defaults and save the startup file. Don't save it with a rabbit on there, because every time you open up you'll end up with a rabbit. So don't have any other objects on the screen when you save the startup file. But it is important, I feel, to have this because of the way they're working with these assets over here. You could, if you want, have the snap feature switched on as well. I tend not to, but the move one I do have. Probably start off with 3D templates, bevel objects there as well. And you can have the asset manager closed when you save your startup file. Because I'm using these assets all the time, I tend to have this panel open when I go to File, Default and save the startup file. The other thing is top orthographic. I would have this here as well. There are a number of different views that you can have. Yeah, you can view from the top, the bottom, the front or the back. So let me just add an object first of all to show you what that's like. So if I go to Add Mesh, if I add my monkey on here, if I just look at that, you can see I'm actually looking at the monkey from the top view here, viewpoint top. Okay, now that doesn't work terribly well with the monkey, but I can assure you it does work well having the top view with all of the assets that we've got in FluidDesigner, which you're going to use for 3D printing. And also I tend to have orthographic mode rather than perspective. And over here you can switch to perspective mode. It doesn't make a lot of difference with the face itself, but I just feel it looks a little bit better if we're in orthographic mode. In other words, that this is a square rather than going off into the distance as in perspective mode. So here it says user perspective, Here it says user orthographic. Alright, I prefer the orthographic mode, and I prefer viewpoint and top view, so top orthographic before I save my startup file. Instead of using the view and viewpoint menu, you can actually use these ones over here. So the Z in the middle is the top view. X on the right, if you click on X on right, you'll switch to the right view. So Z is top view, top orthographic, looking at the top of the head of this monkey. X is looking at it from the right. Now Y will actually look at it from the back. So the Y is a bit odd. Yeah, so rather than click on Y, what we really would recommend you do is you click on the one opposite it and you get the front view. So that's a slightly odd. Z will give you the top view, X will give you the right view, and instead of clicking on Y, if you click on the empty circle opposite it, you'll get the front view. Slightly odd that, I know, but essentially you want X, Y and Z like this to give you the front view, and X and Y, if you remember in school, you would draw the X axis and the Y axis, X and Y, and Z is coming up out of the screen there. That's the top orthographic. So if we just delete the monkey there, so I would have move selected here, I would have this folder open, I would have metric and millimeters, I would have this one in the grid shape like this, and X, Y and Z like that, and top orthographic, and then go to File, Defaults, and save the startup file. And every time you open a new file from now on, when you're working with these assets over here, they will always go onto the page. It doesn't matter which ones you use, provided you're in top view, they will go on like that rather than you loading them up in that view. You don't want them in that view, you want to be in the top view, so in other words the Z here. Okay, so yeah, that's basically how you can set up the add-ons and do the save startup file for the FluidDesigner for 3D printing assets when you're working with Blender 2.9 and the JewelCraft add-on. Thank you for watching.